Hey, podcast listeners, it's Tria along with you once again with Nonprofit Lowdown. Today, I'm excited to introduce my guest, Billy Broas. He is a messaging strategist. He is the founder of the Five Lightbulbs and recently published his new book, Simple Marketing for Smart People. So today we are going to talk about marketing and fundraising and the nonprofit world. So, Billy, welcome to the show.
All right. Thanks so much, Ria. Hey, pumped to be here.
We're excited to have you because I'm all about talking about how to get that money, honey. But before we jump into the nuts and bolts, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how does one become a messaging strategist?
Yeah, so I never thought I would be one. For one, I had a very traditional upbringing, no exposure to sales or marketing or anything like that. Total introvert, total nerd. I have a science background, and I worked in the clean energy industry as my career out of college. But had that entrepreneurial itch, so I started a side hustle while I was at that job, and it was teaching beer brewing classes online of all things. So I had this passion for brewing my own beer, wanted to share it with the world, and eventually was able to leave that job and run the beer website full time. Now, in doing that, that leads us to how I became this marketing strategist, messaging strategist. I realized that, and I'm sure your listener can resonate with this, when you're doing marketing or sales, especially online marketing, there are a million shiny objects out there. And I was just in the weeds of it. And I was fiddling with WordPress plugins and social media platforms and countdown timers, all these things. And I realized that not everything is created equal, and some things just make a bigger difference than others. And at the end of the day, although I could fiddle with those shiny objects, I saw that I could just rewrite a headline on my website and double the signups to my online beer brewing courses. And so that took me into this world of messaging, and I just decided to focus only on that because I found that to be the biggest needle mover. And it makes sense. We change our words and we change our results.
Oh, that's such a good way to frame it. Actually, I just downloaded a book, in addition to your very excellent book, this book called Very Good Copy. And it's so interesting how copy is a driver of growth. So can you talk a little bit about, especially for folks in the nonprofit sector, similar to you, often don't come from a marketing background or a sales background, and they're just sort of maybe they got in the work because they really love the program. I call it, hugging the panda bears. So can you walk us through a little bit of how we should be thinking about marketing? Because I also think that there can be kind of a visceral reaction to like the word marketing. It's like, oh, yeah, don't want to do that.
That was my reaction. Yeah, yeah, totally. You have there's all these negative stereotypes associated with it. So you have, like the bro marketer. He's like this 19-year-old dude, and he's got his rented Lamborghini behind him, right? Telling you, you can make all this money online. So we have like that marketer. We have of course, the used car salesman, right, with the slicked back hair and everything. And so when I realized that, I sort of came from the ivory towers, right, of academia, and I learned marketing, but my marketing class assumed that I was like the CMO of Walmart, and I had all those salespeople were doing the job for me, so I didn't need to do it. Now I got to sell my beer brewing courses, and I need to be that salesperson, and I felt very icky about that, and it was very uncomfortable. So the first thing for your listener that you have to realize is that those are just negative stereotypes. And it's always the case where the worst examples are the ones that pop into our mind. Uh, but there are good examples as well. And I'm sure like you, Ria, and me, and your listener, we have a lot of products that are in our home right now that we love, that we weren't burned by, and that the marketing that was done to us was generous and charitable and gentle and not heavy-handed. But we forget those examples, right? And that's the sign that it was good marketing. So it's tough, right? Because we can't bring those things to mind. We know the bad examples, but that's the first thing I would say to your listener is it's normal to think of those negative stereotypes, but that's not what marketing has to be.
So it's an interesting question. How would you define marketing and how does marketing relate to sales, or in the case of the nonprofit, marketing relate to fundraising?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So there's this famous management consultant, Peter Drucker, and I love his quote. And he says that the goal of marketing is to make selling superfluous. and I would say it's kind of a complicated word for me. So I like to say it as the goal of marketing is to make selling a heck of a lot easier and maybe even unnecessary. So if you think about it as a spectrum, you want to think about your prospect, your potential client or customer or donor in this case, as going through marketing first before getting to the selling portion. So a good way to think about this is if there's a spotlight that's hovering over that spectrum, and the first 75% of that journey, the spotlight is on the customer or the potential donor. And then only once they realize that you get them and that there is this problem or this opportunity for them, then you turn your language more to you and to what you are offering for them. And that's when you get into the sales portion. But the mistake a lot of people make is they jump right into selling, and without having taken that person through the marketing, well, now you're in this position where this person, they don't even really know who you are. They don't really understand what the opportunity is here. And so you face this resistance when you make your offer to them. Whereas if they would have gone through this process of marketing first, and we can talk about how to do that. I'm a big fan of content marketing and doing what I call in the book belief building through content marketing. If you do it that way, now when you present your opportunity to them, your offer to them, they're warmed up, they're ready to go, they're totally on board. So instead of you dragging them through the door, you just open the door, step to the side, and they gladly glide through.
Oh, that is so good. And actually, that's very resonant because I know a lot of nonprofits, they really struggle with fundraising or they struggle with, getting the solicitation or whatever. And I think to your point, if we actually did a better job of marketing, we would warm up the audience. So by the time we get to the ask, it just feels like a natural next step of like, yes, of course, I would do that because I've already gone through this process with you. I've gone on a journey. I've understood what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. So could you help us to, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of the nonprofit executive who has no marketing background. What do you mean when you say content marketing?
Yeah, and I love how you put that. Yes, so the sale, the donation is the natural next step. So that is the goal of the content marketing. And by the way, you don't. I have beef with content marketing because not everyone frames it that way. It's more like, hey, just put out a whole bunch of content, and eventually it's going to come back to you in the form of money. And the problem with that is it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And so we need more of a strategy to it. And that's what I can provide your listener with. So content marketing, it's educating your customer on how to better value what you're offering. That's the way that I look at it. So if you think about that spectrum I talked about, you could jump right to the sales phase of that. And that's what a lot of people do. That's cold calling is a good example of that. And then that just becomes a numbers game, right? Like you're gonna get rejected a lot, and it's very uncomfortable. And I'm sure your listener, like I don't like to do that again. I'm an introvert. I'm kind of conflict avoidant, but that does work, right? So people who don't have the patience maybe and don't want or just don't know about this process of content marketing, you could just dial for dollars, right? But you're gonna get rejected a lot. What especially copywriters you mentioned, I love that you mentioned that copywriting book. What they discovered is that that's not the most efficient way to go about it. And so, what you can do instead is, instead of taking your personal time up, because again, this takes a lot of time to cold call. What you can do instead of doing this one-to-one thing where you're talking to people individually, you put out content. So this might come in the form of uh, a PDF that you write. It could be a blog article. Think about the different mediums that are out there, the big three, where you have written text, you have audio like we're doing now, and you have video. And you have endless channels within those, right? So video, you have YouTube, audio, you have podcasts, text, you have a whole bunch of options from LinkedIn to Twitter to blogging. Okay, so what you're doing, so that's your marketing. So now instead of one to one, it's one to 10,000 or even 10 million. That's the beauty of broadcasting a marketing message. And that's what copywriters do. And so then what you do through your content marketing goes back to what I said earlier, where you want to educate them so that they can properly value your offer, so that by the time you make your offer, they're warmed up and ready to go.
One thing that was rattling around in my brain recently is this idea of like nobody cares about you, they only care about themselves, which sounds very harsh. But I think the mistake that I see a lot of nonprofits and possibly businesses make as well is that they spend a lot of time talking about themselves And, it looks like newsletters or it's like, this is our new staff member and here's our new program and da 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 da, without really thinking about what's in it for my reader. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when we're thinking about marketing, how do we calibrate it such that it does the thing that we want it to do, which is to educate people and get them warmed up, so to speak,
Yeah.
for the eventual transaction.
Yeah. So Ria, I think here would be a good spot if I could to run through my five light bulbs framework because that would
I
really
would
help.
love for you to run through your five light bulbs framework. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so it's tough, right? Because we're so close to what we do. It's just natural for us to want to talk about what we do because it's so cool and we're helping people. But we know that we can't at least lead with that. So I said, okay, well, I need a checklist to make sure that I don't do that and my clients that I work with don't do that. So I came up with this fun thing called the five light bulbs. And I'm a very visual thinker, and I think a lot of people are. So I had an illustrator create this whole world for it, and it really helps the concept sink in. So if your listener goes to fivelightbulbs.com, you can see all these illustrations that we have for each light bulb. But to go through them, light bulb one represents where your customer or your prospect, your potential donor is now. So this is their status quo. This is their everyday experience, and this is where they are experiencing a problem. Even if they're not hyper aware of it, it might be something a little bit subconscious, a bit of an unease, something there's a longing there. And so what you want to do is give voice to that. You want to give voice. What we say is check the box on light bulb one. So that's not saying the words we, our company, we've been in business for 30 years, we've won these awards. It's saying the golden word in marketing, which is you, the prospect or potential donor. So that's light bulb one. And then, okay, so they have this a problem or an unease, something more that they want, but are we the only game in town? Are we the only nonprofit? Certainly not, right? There's other options out there. And so that's represented by light bulb two. So light bulb two represents those other options that they have to solve their problem. And it seems counterintuitive. Like we don't want to talk about our competitors because our prospects might go with them. But no, I encourage you to lean into that and to give voice to those other options that are out there. And not like throwing rocks at them or anything or saying, oh, well, they stink. No, but laying out criteria and saying, well, here's what they focus on and here's what we focus on. And in some cases, you might want to go with them, but in a lot of cases, I think we're the right choice for you. And so that leads to light bulb three, which if light bulb two are those other bridges that your prospect could cross to solve their problem, light bulb three is your bridge. So it's your way of doing things. It's your philosophy. It's your focus. And then light bulb four is your offer. So this would be the different types of donations or funding levels that are available for your listener, which is really just a vehicle for your light bulb three, the thing that you're focused on. It's good to have different options, just like there's different product options out there. You can, if you're working with I know you do coaching and consulting, Ria. You have a book as well. So you can, if you want to hire Ria, you can hire her or buy her book, right? So that's represented by your light bulb four, these different delivery vehicles. And then finally, you have light bulb five, which represents your prospect's new life. So this is that other side of the bridge where the birds are chirping, the sun is shining, and you want to give voice to that as well in your marketing material, even before they buy with you or donate to you, because you want to show them what they get out of it. So light bulb five answers the question, "What's in it for me?" So those are the five light bulbs, and again, you can think about them as a kind of checklist for your marketing collateral.
That's so good. And actually, I want to talk in a second about the belief building that you talk about in your book. But the one thing that's coming up for me is I know that there are nonprofit folks, many of whom are in small organizations that are like, Billy, I don't have a marketing department. I don't have a communications department. It's just me. And I think one of the challenges, to your point, is we're so close to the work that it's hard to see it. I mean, I usually say, you can't read the label from inside the bottle. So, how would you recommend folks, if they want to follow this process or implement some of the things that you talk about in your book, Simple Marketing for Smart People, that they do it without the benefit of a department or even a marketing expert on their team?
Yeah, it can be really overwhelming because there are, like I said earlier, so many shiny objects out there. There's all these platforms. We think we have to be on all of them. We see people posting so many times per day. But the remedy for that is really this idea of belief building and realizing that those are just marketing channels that are out there. And there's endless channels and they come and go. And what's important is not so much the marketing channel that you're on or the social media platform, it's what you say on it. So you can get away just being on one platform, and I would encourage you to be on one where you can reach your ideal person. So if you so at least pick one and think about where they might hang out, where they might read things or listen to things or watch things. What you really want to focus on is what you say on them, and not just post randomly or throw spaghetti at the wall or anything. But in the book, we give you this focusing question, which is it was really a mind blower for me. So I'll share it with your listener now. And that question is, what does my customer need to believe in order to buy? What does my customer need to believe in order to buy? Another way you can phrase that is, what does my customer need to, or my potential donor in this case, need to agree to in order for that donation to be obvious and just a no-brainer? And that kind of gets your wheels turning. And that's really the remedy for this curse of knowledge that we all have where we're too close to it, because it surfaces these assumptions that we're making about our listener. So or sorry, our our prospect. So for your listener, I would encourage you to ask that question now. What does my potential donor need to believe in order to buy? What do they need to believe is important? What do they need to believe about what happens if this problem doesn't get solved? And so in your answering of that question, there's all these beliefs that you're going to start to surface. That then becomes the marketing content. So what you then do is you address those beliefs. You are the one to instill those beliefs. So if there's a problem out there that your prospect just does not realize is important or urgent or worthy of their attention, you instill the belief that that thing is important and urgent and worthy of their attention through your marketing content. And so that becomes your core message. And then you just pick the channel or the distribution avenue that you send that message through, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, blogging, email, etc.
As you're talking, it sounds so simple, hence simple marketing for certain people. But I think it's one of these things that's simple, not easy. And the thing that I'm thinking about is I work with lots of different nonprofits that are doing lots of different causes. And I think the challenge that I see a lot of them run into is like, well, yeah, like everybody should care about, niche thing. Like everybody should care about saving the pandas. Everybody should care about whatever, whatever. And so I guess I'm wondering for you is how would you counsel someone with that? Because I think there's a tension here between like, yeah, there are certainly people in the world who might care about this thing and just are not aware of, the plight of the panda bear.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a whole bunch of people in the world who will hear about it and decide that that's not the thing that they are going to spend time and energy and resources supporting. So help us think about how are we, parsing all of the potential donors in the world versus actually the people who are for whom this is for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the book, I give this example of carpet cleaning, which is kind of like, it seems like a trivial example, but something that's very relatable. And we'll make the point where there's this a guy named Joe, and he's kind of well known now in entrepreneurial circles because he had this carpet cleaning company in Ohio, and all he was doing was just making offers to people. So putting out coupons and discounts and things like that to the people in this Ohio town to buy his carpet cleaning services. And no one was signing up with them, despite even the coupons. And if they did, well, okay, now he's discounting a lot, so he's losing all his profit margin. So what he realized was that they just did not realize how important it was to clean your carpet. So he switched from pitching and making these sales offers and coupons to educating. And so when you take this approach, marketing becomes education. And so people didn't realize that your carpets can be thousands of times dirtier than a toilet seat. They didn't realize that dirty carpets are one of the leading causes of asthma. They just didn't know these things. So he started to provide this through education. So he would send out these educational pamphlets and booklets in the mail talking about carpets. Yes, and also he would talk about the household health as a whole, of which carpets, if you have them, are a big part of it. And through that, people, one, became educated, but two, realized the importance of cleaning their carpet. And then who are they going to hire when it comes time, when they realize, like, okay, I need to take care of these dirty carpets immediately? They're going to hire Joe. So for your listener, you're right. we want them, we know how important these issues are, but we still need to argue for them. And so that's why, like in the book, what I say is the best discipline for doing marketing is the discipline of argumentation. And not like, like a road rage kind of an argument or like throwing your phone at the wall, but a rhetorical argument. Aristotle making a case like a lawyer would make a case to a judge or a jury. So in doing that, you might make a claim. That's a part of the terminology here. So if you're claiming, okay, the pandas are really important, we need to save the pandas, then what follows a claim? Well, from argumentation, we know that proof has to follow a claim. In the courtroom, we see exhibit A, right? The lawyer will hold that up, and then exhibit B. And so they're backing up their claim with proof. And for your listener, I encourage you to do the same thing with the claims that you're making. And in doing so, you will persuade your potential donor and the people who can help you with fundraising to realize, oh man, this thing is really important. I'm on board.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because the other side of the coin too is I also think people should know that they should maybe not waste an enormous amount of time and effort on people for whom this is never going to be their thing, right? I always think about the Kevin Kelly and Thousand True Fans. Like you can build a very respectable business or nonprofit with just 1,000 true fans. And considering the fact that there are what, 300 plus million people in the US and was it 7 billion people on the planet? I don't know where we're at right now. Like you could find 1,000 people who truly love what you do.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You want to preach to the converted as much as possible. When I was doing the beer brewing courses, I made that mistake where I wanted people to, I know it's not the same as beer, but still, I wanted people to care about beer brewing as much as I did.
Mhm.
And fact of the matter is that most beer brewers, they're weekend warriors, or not even that. They might brew every 6 months or just once a year for their birthday. So how likely are they to spend a couple $100s on my online beer tasting class? Or yeah, it was a beer tasting class actually, which teaches them all these beer tasting skills and advanced homebrewing techniques. And so I'd be like, come on, like, isn't this cool? Don't you want to get more into this? And they're just like, nah. Now there were, but if I could go back and do it again, there was a small segment, small but passionate group of people, competitive brewers especially, who were entering competitions because I was trying to please everyone, I really pleased no one. And if I could go back and do it again, I would have spoken only to that passionate group and just forgotten about the rest who were never going to be as into it as I was.
Oh, that's such a good point. So the example in the book, as I remember it, is that you were getting, highly technical questions from like that small, passionate group. And I sort of feel like in some ways it's analogous to what we see in nonprofits, which is sometimes people can get into very like technical jargony language, especially folks that are doing like advocacy work will get very technical in a way that feels not that understandable or sort of inaccessible to your average person. So I'm wondering how does that fit within the five light bulbs framework?
Yeah, that's really that curse of knowledge, isn't it? Where we're so in the weeds with what we do. Where that's the example I was saying in the book about beer, where to me it's not just beer anymore, or even the two big categories a lot of people know, which are ales and lagers. I know 100. I can name 150 styles of beer. So when someone orders a beer at the bar, I'm like, what are you talking about? You can't just order it like that. You can't just say I want a beer. It's like, do you want this or this or this or this? But what we
Mm,
need to do is simplify it into these larger categories, which is very difficult. But that's what brings us out of the weeds. It's not dumbing it down. It's simplifying. And when you simplify it in the way I'm describing, it's compressed. You can
mm,
unpack it, just like I can unpack the word beer into 150 different words. So you want to think about how you can compress what you do into simpler language to meet people where they are. And then you can start to unpack that and take them more into the details. But if you lead with the details and all the technical jargon, you're going to lose them right from the outset.
right. And it's such an interesting point. I'm wondering, is there a tension between, because you said if you could do it all over again, you would just focus on like those super passionate people. And I think it seems to me these super passionate people really geek out on the technical stuff. And yet at the
Mhm.
same time, you're also trying to build a funnel big enough to get the people who might be might be into the thing that you want to be into, but they just need more of an entry point. So are those two things in competition?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there were actually two groups of the technical people. So they weren't so much technical, they're more just avid homebrewers who were really into it, but they didn't necessarily know all the technical details. There were those, and there were, and a lot of those I couldn't reach either, where they were know-it-alls, to put it frankly, right? And I was
Yeah.
selling courses, and they're like, "Well, what can this guy teach?" I was also a lot younger. I was in my early 20s, and most homebrewers like like dudes in their 50s and 60s. So like
Hmm.
I frankly like I didn't know more than them about a lot of things, but you can never convince them of that, right?
Right.
So my sweet spot was really the people who were into it. They wanted, they did it a lot. They wanted to do it more, but they just didn't have that knowledge yet. So for them, that's who was really the center of my bullseye. And so I'd say for your listener, you want to think about, people, we have a desire to be consistent with our previous actions. And so you might think about people who have take actions that have been consistent with what you're asking them to do, like the carpet cleaning example, right? Like that message only resonated to people who had carpets. So you want to think about relevance, and by saying, "Hey,
Hmm.
you have carpets, you might be interested in this," and that can be a lesson for your listeners to think to take and say, "Okay, well, who might have done some, maybe donated to something similar or taken an action that's in line, congruent with what I'm asking them to do," and then you can bring them up and bring that up in the content marketing and say, "Hey, since you did this, you might also be interested in this." And that's where you
Hmm.
check that box on relevancy.
As you're talking, Billy, I'm thinking too about the importance of specificity and the importance of focus because at the end of the day, I'm guessing most of the folks listening to this podcast don't have endless marketing budget, right? They don't have the ability to spend money like Apple or Nike or something. And so I'm wondering, how do you narrow and get more specific about, to your point, the bullseye when it feels so tempting to be like, well, we're for everybody. We want everybody to donate. But to your point, if you're for everybody, you're for nobody. And so I'm calling it recently, the woman in the sexy red dress. Like, how do you ignore the woman in the sexy red dress for those Matrix fans out there to really focus on the core of the people that you should be talking to?
Yeah. Okay. So I wrestle with this. I got a good solution for your listener here. So, because we deal with this a lot, we have workshops and we have people come in, business owners who are like, "I can serve all these people, but where do I start?" And it's a real
Hmm.
risk when you're, just a one man band and you're spread very thin. You have a limited budget. You don't have the budget of like an Apple. You can't afford to target everyone. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you're saying no to those people forever. So it's really a question of when you make your advancement into those slightly colder markets where it's not quite the center of the bullseye, the outer rings of the target, right? And so the concept that we teach is called the tip of the spear. And that's a pretty familiar metaphor. So you want to think about the tip of the spear. So who can I start with right now? Who are the people who are most likely to donate, to sign up right now? That's that center of the bullseye. And so that's going to be, especially when you have limited resources, like I'm sure a lot of your listeners do, that's where you want to start because that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. Now, the drawback of that is that it's a limited pool of people. There were only so many of those avid homebrewers. And if I would have stuck with that business, I eventually sold it. But if I would have stuck with it, I would have exhausted that pool of people. But because I had started with them, I would have had the financial resources, and your listeners will have the financial resources. If you start with these, you know, low hanging fruit, to use that old cliche, you'll have the financial resources to advance into those colder markets, into those outer rings, because this education based marketing approach that we take, content marketing, it takes money, right? Whether it's paying people to write the content or just your time, it takes money. But by starting with the tip of the spear, you acquire the financial resources to advance into those colder markets and reach some of those people that you can help. It just won't be on day one. It might be in year 2 or 3, 5, or even 10.
It's funny. Since our conversation and since reading your book, I created a persona on ChatGPT and asked them about belief building and like what beliefs that they have to have in order to move themselves along the continuum. And it's was a very interesting response. So thanks for that.
Oh, cool. How did that go? The AI is very, by the way, we're doing a lot with AI in our workshops now. It's a powerful tool to combine with what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was actually really great. But what was interesting to me about it, so I came up with a cool prompt, and it generated sort of a donor journey, but the core of it, the kernel of it had to be based on real things, right? And so I can't stress this enough. Like you have to talk to your donors. You have to truly understand like who are they? What are their motivations? What's the story that they have? And you can use it as an avatar, but I think a lot of people think that there's some way around just talking to people. And it's like, yeah, there's no like I haven't found a way to AI my way out of talking to humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that voice of customer we call it is so important. Can I give your listener a cool hack with that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so what you do is you have a call that you can record like this, and you get their permission, of course, to record it, and ask them these questions. Try to surface these beliefs that they have. Ask them questions not about you or your product or anything, but around their day-to-day life. About the the things that they participate in, what their average day looks like, and some of the problems that they're encountering, and how that makes them feel, and some of the negative consequences of those challenges that they're facing, and you record that and you're going to get a transcript, and then you can plug that into these AI tools like ChatGPT, and that's going to create this really rich profile for you. Because you're right, it's the old saying, crap in, crap out, where if you don't put anything good into ChatGPT, you're not going to get anything good out. But if you do this and you collect that voice of customer and plug that into the AI, then you get a very rich persona, and then you can help that. You can use that to help you create your marketing content.
So let's talk about content marketing because I think in theory it sounds great. I think in practice, especially for the, overworked uh nonprofit executive director who's running around trying to do all the things, it feels like a lot of work to be able to do it thoughtfully, and B, sort of a slower rate of versus, just dialing for dollars. And so I think the challenge is that we live in a very, and I'll speak for the nonprofit world, sort of in general, like kind of a scarcity mode of like survival. And we're always just thinking about like the next quarter, the next payroll versus what I sounds like the long game is with content marketing, because it seems like a slower build. So I guess my question to you is how do you make the time and the investment to do this well?
Yeah, it can take a lot of time. It really can. One thing I would say is if you want to make the most of your time, and so just by following this belief building approach, and the five light bulbs are a great resource to use. It doesn't need to take that much time. And we found with the five light bulbs, for example, my co-author on the book, he shipped in a few chapters, and we use his business really as a case study. And he went through the five light bulbs, and he noticed that just by hitting on one light bulb that he had been neglecting, which for him was light bulb one, he published one blog post on that where he went all in on that light bulb one, that empathy piece, and that just opened the floodgates. And that was
Mm.
something you'll find, and so your listener will find that often there is just like that one false belief that they have, your prospects, your potential donors, that is holding them back. Where if you give voice to that, it will open the floodgates, and you'll see all these people now converting who are almost there, right? They were almost there, but they just need to hear this one thing. So that's one piece of advice I'll give is to once you start to hit on some of these beliefs, go through these exercises. If you go into the book, we have a worksheet that will link you to that will help you fill out those beliefs. The other thing I say is that you can think about it in terms of even just one, like for him, it was one content piece, and that was just a blog post. But you'll find that really the key to marketing success is saying the same core message and hitting it from a bunch of different angles. But that core message is kind of something that you take on the road with you. You're going to be repeating it a lot, whether it's a talk that you give, or whether it's a PDF that you write, or whether it's a book. It's a great example. So, like, yeah, I'm a fan of ongoing content marketing. I think it's smart, right? I like to post to social media on a regular basis and everything. But often it's just that one marketing piece that hits on all those required beliefs, or all the five light bulbs, and then that's all really that you need. That's the 80/20 of it. And so it doesn't need to be this constant slog of always putting out content.
Oh, that sounds great. The
Yeah.
content beast is real. But
Yeah.
let's talk about testing messaging and testing marketing, because I think the other thing is sometimes we create in a vacuum and we're like, this is great. This is gonna be amazing. Everyone's gonna love it. And then it falls flat. And then I think on the other hand, we can also get into everyone gets an opinion, and it's kind of like writing by what's the term, right? Writing by committee, which is always a deal killer. So can you tell us, very tactically how you might recommend a small nonprofit start to use the five light bulbs framework of the belief building in a way that feels manageable, but also is testing along the way?
Yeah, and your listener might be confused about the connection between the belief building and the five light bulbs. So essentially, in this, so I don't mention the five light bulbs in the book. The book is really the underlying philosophy behind the five light bulbs. So the book goes into this idea of belief building, asking this question: what beliefs do my prospects need to have in order to buy? The five light bulbs helps you organize those beliefs, and it's really the easy button in implementing this belief building approach. It's a tool, so they go hand in hand together. And why I like the five light bulbs, and other people do too, and the way that they use it is it's helpful for testing, which was your question. So you might test. So you might put together a content calendar for the month, and instead of doing it the way that you normally do it, you might try this approach where you say, okay, in week one, we're going to test light bulb one. We're going to put out some light bulb one messages. In week two, it's going to be light bulb two. And so you put the content out there and you see what resonates, and most things will not. That's just how it goes. Most things will not. But just like venture capitalists, the way that they invest in companies, they'll invest in 10 companies knowing that nine will fail, but the one that succeeds will make it all worth it, 10 times
Hmm.
over. Take the same approach to your content, where just know that out of the 10 pieces of content you put out there, nine will likely flop. Some will be somewhere in between, but you will likely have one that just really strikes a nerve. And when you find that thing, don't do what a lot of people do, which is just say, oh, that was cool, and then move on to the next one. No, double down on that thing and start to. I promise you, there's a whole world within that content piece, and start exploring it from all different angles. Put it into different formats. If it was text, make a video from it, make a podcast from it. Because man, once you find that gold, you do not want to move on.
That's so funny. I'm just laughing because I remember when I was in ED and that ice bucket challenge was going around on social. And I remember
Mhm.
my board members being like, well, why don't we just like create a viral ice bucket challenge? And I was like, oh, okay, sure. Yes, right. If I could just
Works like
create
that.
viral content, would I be sitting here with you
Yeah.
people? Come on.
Well, it's funny you say that because I've been fortunate to be behind the scenes of a lot of online businesses and social media accounts and things like that. And you wouldn't believe how many there are that have huge followings and just make zero money from them.
Mm.
Because there's a difference between like going viral and racking up views and all that. On the flip side, I've been behind these businesses that don't even have a website, and they're just or social media, and they're just crushing it. So it's the quality over quantity argument. But when you take this belief building approach, you might have something go viral, but it's more important that you hit on these beliefs, and you'll find that it leads to more sales, donation, fundraising, etc.
So let me ask you, I mean, so many questions, but I know that again, stepping into the shoes of, the time-strapped executive director or development director, that, the social media or the newsletter just feels like another thing I have to do. So can you speak to the value of consistency when it comes to marketing?
Yeah, showing it's
By that, it's like showing up.
yeah, showing up. Yeah, and look, I struggle with this too. I'm more of a creative type. I'm good at coming up with these ideas, but when it comes down to actually getting the work done, making sure that I hit publish every week, yeah, not my area of expertise. I have an amazing wife that helps me out with that, so she's very good with the details, very good about implementation. So I think that's a lesson right there, is to kind of know which one that you are. There's a book, I can't remember the title of it, but it's out there about the value of having these partnerships where you have one person who's typically the visionary, and then the other one, I don't know if you know the book I'm talking about. The other one's more
Oh,
of the
I do.
implementer.
It's Gino Wickman. It's called Rocket Fuel. I love it.
Rocket Fuel.
The visionary and the integrator.
Integrator. Yes. So I'm the
Yeah.
visionary, Laura's the integrator, and we need both. And so I think that's a good first step. It's just being aware of that, maybe not Like I used to be very hard on myself because I couldn't get things across the finish line. But now I just realized like that's just not my zone of genius. So I think that's a
Hmm.
good first step is just realizing that. And then if you need someone to fill that gap, finding that person for you.
Well, and I think to go back to your point too, as someone who was an executive director and now running my own business, often I find myself thinking like, okay, well, what do I write this week? So it's really helpful to have a framework to know like that it's not random, that you're not just like, you know, deep thoughts by Jack Candy. That's for the old
Yeah,
school people out there.
I
But
know that one.
that rather there's a purpose behind the content I'm putting out that's belief building and that it's really about the framework of the five light bulbs to help move people along this process with you.
Yes, and I can tell you that that's feedback that we've gotten from people who have done our programs where they were in that position where they weren't being consistent. But often the problem is not the problem you think you the problem that you think is your problem is not the real problem. It's starting with the blank page and not knowing that what you're putting out there is going to bring anything back. And we find the feedback we get is that starting with this idea of belief building and having these light bulb ideas and things filled in. So when you sit down, you have all these ideas to choose from. That often solves that problem of consistency.
Okay, last question. I know I keep saying last question, but there's so much here. So, what's that old advertising saying? Like, we know that 50% of our
Oh yeah,
spending isn't bringing in money, but we don't know which 50%. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, like half works, but I don't know which half.
yeah, exactly. So, same question to you, because again, I know people are listening and they're like, it sounds great, Billy, in a world where I could put out content and know that it will come back in some sort of, donation, volunteer, like whatever. That's great, but how do I know which 50%? And so I guess my question to you, and maybe this is a personal question, because like, for example, I've been doing this podcast for almost 5 years. I'm almost at three. By the time folks are listening, it'll be more than 300 episodes. And so how do I know the value of the content that I'm putting out when it's the long game? When I get on the phone with someone and they're like, well, I've been listening to your podcast for years. Like that's the marketing, right? So by the time you're on the call, then it's like, well, I'm assuming that you have consumed this content. So what's my question? My question is, how do you measure ROI?
Oh man, that is a tough one, isn't it? Yeah, everyone struggles with that one, especially these days where you have, I think it was easier back in the day where you didn't, before the internet, where it was like either TV commercial or newspaper, right? Like that's what they came in through. It was easy to ask them, easy to track. Now, like with the different devices that everyone
Mm-hmm.
has and all the different platforms and everything, I mean, it's a struggle that even people way smarter than me when it comes to tracking in this, this whole field of analytics that they deal with. So I'm right there with you. I don't have a great answer for you. Now, the way I would approach it is kind of twofold. I would say it's quantitative and qualitative, where you
Mm-hmm.
you try to track those numbers as best you can. Like I do believe in numbers. When I worked in the energy industry, and I was in spreadsheets all day long. Numbers are very important to me. At the same time, especially getting more into the softer side with messaging and communication, more of the human side of things, and this idea of belief building, I realized that the qualitative side is just as, if not more important. And when you have these conversations, one thing you'll find if you start to implement these techniques is you'll find these people coming to these calls more educated. Like they
Mm-hmm.
won't. I think we all know that experience of talking with someone, and yeah, we like to sell them something or get them to donate, but we realize that they don't even know what they don't know, and like that
Mm-hmm.
donation is like just miles away. But you'll start to
Mm-hmm.
find when you start to implement this content marketing approach that like, they're right on board with you, right? Like all like they know
Mm-hmm.
the lingo, they have the beliefs and everything, they're ready to go. So start to look for that, and then that's how you know what you're doing is working.
Awesome. Billy, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you feel like folks should know about content marketing or anything else?
Oh, I would say just take it slow, one step at a time. It's easy to overwhelm yourself and to feel like you should be doing all these things, but just take one small step every day, and it really starts to compound over time. And don't fall for the. Everyone wants you to believe that you need to be on the latest social media platform or use the latest software tool or whatever, but you know, go back to the people who came before us, before the internet and all these shiny objects. And I believe that they're better. That's why I study them so much because they didn't have these things to distract us. And it comes down to just being human and human communication. So focus on that and you can't go wrong.
I love that. So, Billy, where can folks find you if they want to learn more about you, if they want to buy the book? We'll make sure to put all of the info in the show notes. But how can folks best connect with you?
Sure. So go to best place to start is with the book, and that will show you my marketing philosophy, and you can decide if you're on board with that or not. And I think if you like this episode, you will be. And there's great tools in the book and resources. So that's simplemarketingbook.com, and we have that in a paperback form. This is it. We also have an ebook, and then and we just recorded Tiago and I the audiobook. That was a fun experience. So if you prefer audiobook, we have that as well.
Fantastic. Well, I make sure to put that in the show notes and I'll put your LinkedIn profile if that's okay. Folks want to get in touch with you that way. Billy, thanks so much. This is super informative, even personally.
Love it. Thanks, Ria. You were a great host. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.